Welcome to 404 Cybersecurity Not Found, where we break through the noise of the digital world. Here we dissect the latest security trends, confront emerging threats, and arm you with the knowledge you need. Welcome everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Simran and today we're joined by the infamous Dr. David Day.
Hey.
Today we're discussing how artificial intelligence and in particular machine learning is challenging the face of the cybersecurity world. My first question is, can you actually explain how attackers are using AI to develop more sophisticated cyber threats?
Yeah, but let me start by explaining a little bit about how AI and machine learning works, what the threat is at least in terms of how it works. If you imagine how you learn something, if you learn a new skill, if you decided you wanted to learn how to play the guitar or whatever, you'd probably buy a few guitar books, maybe go on a few websites about how to play the guitar, maybe watch a few videos, and then you'd at some point have to pick the guitar up, right? Because it doesn't matter how much you read, that isn't going to teach you how to play the guitar. So you have to learn practically. So you've got to learn the theory, then you've got to learn the practice. And I can't remember now what they say. Is it like 10,000 or 100,000 hours or something that you need to practice in order to be considered to be an expert? Now, the advantage that AI has over us is its incredible ability to process data, and it's particularly now with the use of the superfast GPUs that are doing incredible parallel processing, the ability to assimilate data, massive amounts of data, incredibly quickly. So the speed in which it learns is much, much quicker than us. And the speed in which you can put that learning into practice is much faster than we can do as well. So all the learning and getting things wrong and what works and what doesn't can be fed to it in huge amounts very quickly, so it knows what's right and what's wrong. So once you've read your books, you pick your guitar up, probably the first chord you try and play, it's going to be a bum note, right? It's going to buzz. You haven't got your fingers right on the fret. You haven't got your fingers right. You haven't positioned the right pressure on the strings, whatever it might be. And then you go, oh, okay, I need to get that. I need to press a bit harder. But you learn by doing, right? But the AI will know, right? It would have learnt all it's got that knowledge pre-programmed into it. So from a cybersecurity perspective, when you think about what a hacker does, and also what somebody who's trying to defend against a hacker does, both need to be experts. And particularly when you consider, what the hacker is doing, that expertise can be, to some extent, at this point, not completely, but to some extent, replicated using AI. And that's quite frightening because it's like, you can, it's like handing a loaded gun to a child, it's really very worrying. I mean, you don't have to understand the complexities of AI in order to use it, and you don't have to understand, you don't need to have a thorough understanding of ballistics in order to fire a gun. And it worries me. It worries me that these technologies are going to be open to people to misuse. So yeah, that's where my fear is in terms of cyber threats utilizing AI.
And what would you say some of the specific examples of AI-driven cyber attacks that organizations should be wary of are?
Okay, well, I think that so just to sort of build on what we were just discussing, the problem that we have is that imagine you wanted to break into a house, and you wanted to let's say the bad guys decided that he's going to pick the lock. Right? So in a normal scenario, your average Joe thief lock picker would come to the lock and he'd try a few things that he knows, and if they didn't work, he'd go on his way. But an AI algorithm in this particular analogy would have been programmed with data from thousands of successfully picked locks. It would have learned patterns of the commonalities between all the locks. It knows that certain locks are often vulnerable to a specific picking method. and it will try the most likely methods of success first in the process. And when they don't work, it'll learn from that and make its future predictions on how to prioritize even better in the future. So in terms of vulnerability analysis and hacking, it's kind of the same thing. It knows what works to find the vulnerabilities, and it knows what works to exploit the vulnerabilities because it's been pre-programmed with a massive amount of training information. And when it doesn't work, it will learn that particular attack method, that particular cross-site scripting method, or local file injection, or RFI method, or whatever it might be that's being used. It will know when to use that and what kinds of software, and it will learn about those kinds of software, and it will learn about the variations of that kind of software. It might even find commonalities in the code or the binaries from being subject to GitHub, for Microsoft practices, whatever, to learn those vulnerabilities much quicker than we could. And this is the fear with that, the worry with that.
No, I completely understand. And when it comes to AI, how would you say AI is being utilized to enhance cybersecurity defenses and respond to these threats?
Okay, well, I think some of it is necessary to sort of offset the problems that we've just been discussing. So again, if you imagine, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to revisit the previous question, if that's okay. Spend a little bit of time just talking about that, perhaps in a little more detail beyond the analogy. So if you think that these methods of finding vulnerabilities, these vulnerability AI pieces of software, use a combination of techniques. They use something called fuzzing, which is basically sending unexpected random data to software applications to try to find bugs. Now, the term fuzzing, if you're familiar with cybersecurity, and I know many people listening will be, has been around a long time, right? Fuzzing's been around since well before AI was around. Sending just masses of random data and seeing what comes back. The difference with AI is it learns from the responses that it gets from that fuzzing. So it fuzzes the data, sends it off, and it looks at the responses. But as it gets the responses back, it learns about them. And then when it finds one that causes a vulnerability, it learns that and goes, okay, that's a pattern that has success. And it has success in this particular area. And then next time the AI algorithm and small software hits a similar problem with a similar piece of software, it will know the chances of that working are greater than other methods. So it gets very good at being fine-tuned to find vulnerabilities. And in terms of cyber defenses, we've got to think about sort of how we can use that same technology to defend our systems. So in the same way that AI is really good at learning bad things, it's also good at learning how to exploit things. It's also very good at learning what bad things look like. So I'll give you an example of that. When I used to teach at university, I used to talk a lot about network intrusion detection systems. And I used to do comparisons against anomaly-based intrusion detection versus signature-based intrusion detection. And I loved the concept of anomaly-based intrusion detection when I was at university. I loved it. I thought it was a great idea. It's basically get a baseline of information of what a normal network looks like. And then when you see a deviation from that normal, you're like, oh, okay, something bad's happening. Now, the problem with this was inherently false positives. In other words, you would get an alert when there should be no alert. It thinks something bad's happening, and actually there isn't something bad happening. You've got it wrong. And that can happen for many different reasons. So, for example, let's say people change their working patterns. So they're logging on at different times, or you get a new server gets installed, which sends out data and traffic that's different from before, or you install a new application. And the way that works, it changes the dynamics of the network traffic. And these things might fire the anomaly-based intrusion detection system off erroneously, right? A false positive. Now, where AI comes in excitingly at this point, is it continually learns and adapts. So if something does fire if something does happen that's slightly anomalous, it's also been trained with specifics about how frequently that kind of anomalous event might occur, and then sort of fine tunes itself accordingly. Let me give you an analogy, right? So imagine you have a guard dog, right?
Yeah.
And you get your guard dog in your house. You're thinking, right, and maybe you let it out in the garden. It patrols for you and all the rest of it. At first, the guard dog's probably not going to be great, right? So, your friends will come around and it might decide that it wants to attack them because they're a thief, right? So you have to kind of train the guard dog into not doing that.
Yeah.
And then, next door's cat might jump over the fence and it might want to bolt for that. So you've got to train the guard dog not to attack next door's cat. Otherwise, you might get some nasty vet bills and a visit from the RSPCA. So you train the dog becomes aware and it learns your environment, right? It learns to ignore the sound of the dishwasher and the washing machine and the fridge, or it knows the difference between the noise of somebody breaking in and dropping cutlery on the floor. And eventually, over time, it becomes very good at guarding your house, right? It knows the things that should alert it and that it should be doing to protect your home and your house. If you think about this from an intrusion detection point of view in cybersecurity, it learns your environment very well, right? So when your dog gets things wrong, you might give it a very stern telling off. Don't hit your dogs, never do that. But you might give it a very stern telling off. If it gets things right, you might feed it a treat. And the AI mechanisms work in the same way, right? When it gets something wrong, it can so these are things called supervised and unsupervised learning. So in supervised learning, you would tell it got it wrong and it would learn by that. But in unsupervised, it can also look for contextual information as well.
Right.
So if it makes a decision that something's a false positive, it might go, well, is it? Sorry, when you find something that it thinks is a true positive, it thinks is a genuine alert, you might think, well, is it? Or could it be an FP? And then maybe, if it's been trained right, it will have the statistics of how likely it is to be an FP from all the other environments at different companies that it's been trained with. And has access to the knowledge base of, and also it may double check with other systems. It might check in with the SIEM, it might check in with the SOC, it might check in with the antivirus, and it might bring that information together, make a more accurate and a considered decision about whether that's a true alert or a false positive. In much the same way, again, that a person would. So if a human was to do this, that's what they would do, wouldn't they? They might see this and think, actually, do you know what? I don't think that is, although this system's saying it's a real attack, I don't think it is, because we have that new server installed. It could be this, could be that. I'll go and investigate before I make a noise about it. The AI can learn to do the same, right?
Yeah.
So but the speed in which it gets the expertise to do that is much quicker than a human. So again, I'm going to drive us back to that original point. It's the speed in which it can learn. And the amount of data it could be given in a pre-trained knowledge base, in a pre-trained data of what's right, what's wrong, what's a real alert, what isn't a real alert. It can become an expert incredibly quickly when you train it with all that data. And it's not just about, because the mechanisms behind our AI at work have been around a long, long time. I mean, we see the wonderful things that are happening with Anthropic's Opus and with ChatGPT-4 and Gemini and all the rest of them. And these fantastic, they're great, right? Writing essays and project reports and so forth. But the technologies behind that, in terms of the actual underlying mechanisms and algorithms, have kind of been around for ages. I remember learning about those in my first degree at university, and I'll give my age away now. That was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And I remember learning about the same sort of technology, same backpropagation, cache propagation, neural nets. We knew about it all.
Right.
But it wasn't any use at that point because we never had the computational power to get them to do the things we knew they were capable of.
Yeah.
And I always knew, even back then, I thought, once we get the computational power, and it was all about parallel processing. once we get that amount of parallel processing where we can make use of these algorithms, they're going to be scary. Now, it took longer than I thought. Right? I've got to admit, back in the early 90s, I thought by 2005, 2006, it would have been happening, and it hasn't. It's been relatively recently that we've seen this going on. But it's that part of it as well. We have the speed in which we can feed it the data, the amount of data it can learn, the amount of data it can store, the speed in which it can access that data is immense. You can create an expert in a field very quickly. Now, it has shortcomings at the moment, but I have to emphasize at the moment, right? The world's changing. It's an incredibly exciting time right now. And the acceleration of AI, whether you want to accept it or not, is coming faster than you're going to believe. AI is going to improve itself. AI is going to teach AI. AI is going to make better AIs. Those better AIs are going to teach other AIs. Those other AIs are going to build better AIs. And if this process of improving is going to be exponential. It's not a straight line going like that. It's going to be like this. And that's quite frightening. So, in terms of sort of bringing this back to defences, it's the speed in which you can detect that difference from normal. I think. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah. Could you share some insights into how AI-driven systems differ from traditional security measures, and that's in detecting and actually neutralizing threats?
Okay. All right. So let's consider a traditional firewall. So your traditional firewall blocks. Usually, what it does is it looks at your IP address, it looks at the port numbers that you're using. It might even go a little bit further and look into the payload of the package, try and determine what application that might have generated that traffic, and then you tell it, I don't want to be seeing this type of traffic to this particular application. I don't want my employees using BitTorrent. So I'll block all the BitTorrent port numbers, but that's not necessarily going to work because BitTorrent might decide that it's going. The bad guys might decide to use a different port number on BitTorrent. They might decide to use UDP rather than TCP, or change the port numbers, and they might do that just to try and get around the firewall. But how about I've got a very fancy firewall, and my fancy firewall looks at the payload and makes a determination of the traffic because of that. But unfortunately, the bad guys know all of this, right? It's an arms race. So the bad guys know how to manipulate this so that they can change a few bytes within the payload in order for that firewall not to detect it being BitTorrent traffic, and before you know it, they're using BitTorrent traffic against you in a nefarious way. And BitTorrent is used in nefarious ways by the makers, spreading of malware and used for bot controls and so forth. I saw it recently in an investigation that it did, which I can't talk about. So that's your traditional.
Yeah.
But then, if you imagine this from an AI perspective, we don't want the bad guys to win by making things a little bit different so they can circumvent signature-based or rule-based systems. We want to detect when they're trying to be bad. So I'm going to be lazy here and lean on an analogy. But imagine you've got a big wall around your home to protect your house. Now you tell me, right? If you were a baddie, baddie, that shows me age. If you were a thief, and you wanted to get into my house, and you had a wall in front of you, just throw some ideas at me. How might you get around that?
If I was a thief and there was a wall around me, it depends what the wall was made out of.
Well, you were trying to get in, and there was a brick wall surrounding the house. How would you? Let's say the wall was 8 feet. What methods might you use to try to get in?
You'd have to create some sort of cutout in the wall that you can fit yourself through. Perhaps go under the ground, dig a hole under.
Dig a hole under.
You definitely wouldn't jump over the top.
What about a grappling hook?
You could, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't go ahead with jumping over the top. They might see you.
Okay, all right, good. Well, that's interesting you should say that, because that's where I'm leading to. So now imagine traditionally you wouldn't have any, there's no visibility. The wall is just a wall. It doesn't see the person, it just sees, it just stops the person getting it, right?
Yeah.
But then imagine that you've got a bunch of drones flying above your home, watching you. There's nothing you could do then that they wouldn't know that you're trying to get in that house. They see you trying to scale a wall. They'll see you trying to dig under the wall. They'll see you try to chisel through the wall. And this is what, very loosely based, this is how AI can protect from a firewall perspective. Rather than it just blocking it, it has more contextual awareness about what different methods people will use to try to get into your network or to try to circumvent your firewall. It isn't just looking for a specific match in terms of it's this port number, it's using this protocol, it's got this IP address, which traditional firewalls do. It has a lot more contextual awareness than that. It knows what normal looks like. It knows what not normal looks like. It knows what an attack pattern looks like. And how does it know this? Because it's been trained with it, with masses and masses of data for what bad looks like in a particular environment. And then it can continue to learn once it's been deployed. So once it gets deployed, it continues to learn what's bad then. And that could be that if a communication occurs and it picks up evidence, supporting evidence to suggest that actually it's legitimate and that person has every right to be digging a tunnel under your wall for whatever reason, then it would amend its algorithm, it would amend its decision process accordingly. Okay. So it can get all that information about how to protect your network and how to protect the perimeter that's intelligent rather than just if then, rather than just if this and this then block. It's been trained with contextual awareness and with bad guy practices, and therefore it's a lot more nuanced and intelligent in how it makes that decision. Again, artificial intelligence is what it says. It's artificial intelligence. It's trying to mimic what a person does, what experts do, but doing it much, much quicker.
Right.
So that's one example. That's a firewall example. And network intrusion detection systems, it's a similar sort of thing with those. I've mentioned that already, haven't I? With anomaly-based detection-based systems, I don't think it did touch on that. So how they look for deviations in normal. So I used to teach this at university, network intrusion detection systems. I used to talk about the difference between signature-based and anomaly-based.
Right.
The problem with anomaly-based was always that, it used to give false positives. And of course, now we're in a situation where that false positive problem's being eliminated because the defense mechanism, the algorithm that's defending the IDS with the AI intelligence has contextual awareness. So, if a new server gets installed, it doesn't just go, okay, new server, it doesn't just go, okay, there's an attack happening because there's a deviation or a change in traffic.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that previously.
So, based off of all of this information that you've shared with me, and looking forward, what emerging AI technologies do you see playing a pivotal role in shaping cybersecurity strategies?
Okay, so I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of as we move forward is predictive analysis. So I'm saying it's not there now, but it kind of is to some extent, less so in cybersecurity, but I have seen it in other areas, predictive analysis. So there was when I was at university, I was involved in a research project, and the research project was in order to try to determine places where crime would take place. It would actually statistically say the chances of a crime happening in this place are more than this place, even if it had no data at all. on that particular location that it was saying there's likely to be crime here, because it had been programmed with information about other locations where crimes do take place, and the times of year they take place, and the weather when they take place. And with all of this data that it absorbed, it was actually informing law enforcement that, hey, there's likely to be crime in that spot, even though it had no information about that spot at all. And it turned out to be incredibly accurate when it came along. Now, that's also something we can apply from a cybersecurity perspective, because it's not just about defending against what's happening now. It's about anticipating what might be coming or happening in the future. So if AI can be taught about all the bad things that are happening in environments that are different to ours, it can make a predictive analysis about what might happen in a particular environment that it's had no exposure to.
Right. And how do you think organizations should prepare for the integration of some of these technologies to actually protect their companies and organizations against future cyber threats?
Well, you've got to, you've got to embrace it. You've got to lean into the technology. I think, if you look online at the moment, there's a lot of people who push back against it. So, for example, I quite regularly see lawyers, solicitors, medical personnel who understandably and rightly, actually, at this point, push back against it and say it makes terrible mistakes, it gives poor information, it does this wrong, it does that wrong, it can't replace this, it can't replace that. And that constant pushback, honestly, I think a lot of it is in denial. Because some of it, I'm like, okay, maybe you're right now, but don't be dumb about this, right? Because it's the things you're talking about, some of them are minor problems, not major ones, like you're describing in your rant, in your social media rant. And, where's it going to be next year, or in 2 years, or in 5 years? Are you still going to be able to make those same claims then? So this constant pushback against it, I think, is wrong. You're making a mistake if you do that.
Yeah.
It's based out of fear. It's almost like Arkwright's mills all over again. It's Industrial Revolution. Burn the mills. You can't. It's never worked before in history, and it's not going to work now. You can't halt progress. It's coming, and that's it. Accept it. Lean into it. Learn how to use it. Learn how to maximize its efficiency. It's shocking, really. Even when you consider things like cryptography.
Yeah.
With AI now, we're reaching a point where it can assimilate more information about passwords that have been cracked. It can assimilate information about what kinds of patterns are used by password generators. It can use successful, unsuccessful feedback from cracking that it's tried and hasn't worked. And it's all, it's learning faster and faster, and it puts us in a position where even when you think about cryptography, we need to have some fear with that. About how it could impact that. I mean, they talk about the quantum threat against cryptography. Quantum actually might be its savior against AI breaking cryptography. But when I say breaking, I don't really mean breaking, because the maths can't be broken. It's brute forcing. It's really what I'm talking about. But intelligent brute forcing rather than just random brute forcing. And the quantum cryptography thing, by the way, I'm happy to have a chat about another time. It's one of my pet subjects, but I don't think we're going to get time in this podcast. So, don't fight against it, embrace it, find how you can use it, but also think about this as a person. You've got to adapt as an individual to make use of this. I mean, if you imagine people like with all technologies, there's still people that need to operate those milling machines. And when you think about when lathes came around in woodworking, and I can't use a bloody lathe to save my life. You just use the tool to get even better at your job.
Yeah.
Rather than the tool replacing your job, it just changes your job, and you embrace the tool to do that. And people are still needed, really, at the cutting edge, at least, if you think about it from data science's point of view. I'm going to give you an example. Do you know what? I'm going to give you an example. I'm creating at the moment an application to scope system penetration tests, and I wrote the code using Opus in the Anthropic console, text to code. It worked remarkably well. However, it took a few iterations. So it gave me the code. I put the code in our dev environment, tried it out, didn't work, told it why it didn't work. It rewrote it, tried again, didn't work for this reason or that reason. Told it why it didn't work, apologized, did it again. And after a number of iterations, we got there, right? Partly because I wasn't explaining myself properly, or partly because it just got it wrong. But on the other side of it, once the code was created, I got one of our testers, Moment, to test it. Because I thought, stinks a bit like it might be open to cross-site scripting attacks. So I asked Moment to test the code. Moment came back and said, yeah, it's runnable to XSS, and here's why. I went back to Anthropic Claude Opus and said, our pen testers just looked at your code and thinks it stinks, and thinks it's it's a problem with XSS.
Yeah.
And he thinks this is he thinks this is the fix. And he went, you're right. Yes, there is a problem with XSS. I really apologise for that. But your pen tester hasn't given you the full story. Also, you need to do this, this, and this. So I went away and I came back and it didn't. And Moment tested it again and got another cross-site script in exactly the same way. I went back, told it off, and I told it why. Moment thought it was wrong, and eventually it buckled and it said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Your pen tester's right. I'm really grateful for the experience he's given me. It's been extremely helpful. I'll try harder next time," kind of thing. So we still needed him, right? We still needed an expert to set it straight. And I think that's going to continue at least for quite some while, where we're still going to need this human expertise to tell it where it's getting it wrong.
And
will that go on for? I'm really not sure. Really not sure.
And just for those who fear displacement, and obviously with the rise of AI in cybersecurity, how would you say professionals can ensure their skills remain relevant, and how do you think they will be able to safeguard their roles, essentially, from what's going on?
Yeah, it's not a stupid thing to ask, It really isn't. It's not one of those questions that you should think, I'm fine, I don't have to worry about that. I think you should, if I'm honest with you. So I'll go back to my original point, which at least some people, not everybody, and not if you're going to be clever and do the right thing. Right? So the first thing I'd say is embrace, don't fight. So don't get your back up and go, it can never replace me. Not a good thing to do, right? And think to yourself, okay, all right, let me lean into this. How can I use it to make me a better practitioner? How can I use it? How can I use it don't see it as a threat, see it as a tool, right, to make you better at what you want to do? What is the goal of what you want to do within your work, and how can it make you better at that goal? Right? If you think in that way, then that's a much healthier way of thinking. I mean, and also lean into the things which AI really isn't good at. I mean, so it's not particularly good at strategic planning. It's getting better with context, but it's still a bit weak in that area. So if you think about something like an incident response where a breach happens, the AI can make certain decisions, but it can't make the big ones or the killer ones. So you as a person faced with a scenario where, let's say you've gone in the morning and all of your machines have got a ransomware screen up, what are you going to do? To turn around and ask the AI that might not be a great idea, right? You need to have a playbook. You need to make a decision. Some of these need to be made on the fly. You have to think about, you have to contact people, ring people, talk to people, meet with people, engage with people, negotiate with people. AI can't do any of that stuff yet.
That's right.
So, lean into the soft skill side of it. I mean, I tell you, do you know what? If AI replaces everybody's jobs, you know who's going to be left? Salespeople. There'll be any people left. If it gets really good, because you need that or counsellors, right? Although you can get AI counsellors, they suck, by the way. I've tried one. But that human interaction, those soft skills, that I don't see them going anywhere. And also, having the ability to work with it, rather than push back against it. How do you How can you work with it? So, there's still going to be people necessary to make ethical judgments on how it's treating data, whether it's with privacy. And the other thing, get hands-on with it, play with it, learn it. Don't be one of those people who just thinks, what is it? I don't understand it. Figure out how best to use it. Interact with the AI community, with the different groups. Keep abreast of what's going on all the time, because it's moving so quick. Don't blink. It's going to catch up with you. Understand, and from our point of view, right, I'm really excited about how to test it. Because what I see coming is I'm going to give our competition ideas here, which is a concern. What I'm worried about is the APIs, right? So the APIs, properly the APIs for ChatGPT. We're plugging APIs into these systems like this and pulling that data, and using that data in our systems. And it worries me. Well, about where the data's stored, obviously, is a concern, but more about the security of those APIs. Are the APIs secure? Because if they're not, that's where the weakness sits. So for me, I think, pen testing APIs of AI systems and trying to break them, not just from a programmatical point of view of the logic, but trying to break them in terms of how they make a decision about how to interpret what you're saying as well. Can you break them that way? It's holding testing. So that's quite exciting too. So, any new technology that comes along, what supports it, what looks after it, how is it best used? Skill up in those areas. Stay within your sector, just skill up in those areas. If I have a data scientist friend of mine. I go to the gym with him, and in between sets we talk about some crazy stuff. Nobody else in the gym gets what we're on about, but we have these chats, and he's expressed to me before that he has this slight. I mean, he's a very, very talented data scientist. Flew through his PhD at Russell Group University. Does guest lectures, and is very successful in the job that he does. But he was saying to me, he worries that he's going to that his job's going to be replaced, particularly from the programming side. And I gave him the late analogy, and I said, listen, it's a tool. It can't replace you. It's a tool. You're still going to have to. At this point, we can't just trust what it says. Yeah. And isn't that where the worry is? Isn't this where Stephen Hawking's come in with their predictions of world calamity? If we reach a point where we stop questioning what it's giving us, and I sincerely hope we never ever stop questioning what it's giving us, because I think we could be involved at that. But yeah, leaning into it, learning it, adopting it, embracing it, using it to make you better at your job, not it replacing your job.
I guess it's a bit like the goldfish analogy as well. When you've got a goldfish inside a bowl, they can only see what's going on around them. They can't see it from an outside perspective. So although these professionals, they can sometimes question the chances of their displacement, but perhaps they're missing the wider impact. What about if the company gets displaced because they didn't decide to go ahead and adopt AI?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's going to be a lot of organisations that are going to get hurt very badly by adopting late. I mean, I'm not just talking about in our sector, in the cybersecurity sector. I'm talking about, in all sectors. But by sort of thinking, oh yeah, I saw that ChatGPT thing, answers questions, doesn't it, that you give it? Or, oh yeah, my kid's helping. My kid is using it to cheat through his college course, and they think that, and they're not thinking beyond that, right? They're not thinking what's coming and how quick it's going to get, how fast it's going to get better as it teaches itself and as it teaches other AIs, and as those AIs cluster together and teach each other. This thing's going to go to the moon, and very, very quickly. There's a reason why Microsoft have invested, and let's get this correct, right? It's a crazy number. They've invested $100 billion into research in this area. $100 billion, more than many countries' GDP. You're not going to invest that kind of money in that kind of hardware and that kind of software unless you knew what was coming. So brace yourself. It's going to hit, and it's going to hit hard.
So just coming back to that, so what advice do you have for cybersecurity professionals that are looking to adapt and thrive in an increasingly AI-driven industry?
Well, just pretty much what I just said. I think you've got to adopt it as a tool. You have to use it. Use it to make you better at penetration testing. Use it to make you better at cyber defense. Adopt it, train it, learn with it. Look what's out there. How can you incorporate incorporate it into your business? How can you incorporate it into your SIEM, into your SOC? Can you bring it into? Can you find ways of adopting it within firewall technology? I mean, a lot of this we're at the hands of the vendors to do, but in terms of incident response, are there tools out there that can help you do log analysis faster than before? That can correlate data to find out commonalities of bad. The tools are going to these tools. Many of them are in the infancy, but they're going to start leaking out bit by bit. Latch onto them early and use it as a superpower. Consider it as a superpower. You get good with it.
Yeah.
And you're away, right? It's like any tool. If you give a sophisticated tool to somebody, if you give a milling machine to somebody and don't teach them how to use it, they're going to cut your hands off, right? But if you learn how to use it, then it's going to be even better, right? Become skilled with these new tools that are coming along.
Ultimately, yeah. So embracing the future of AI and cybersecurity, what it means is it does mean for us to stay ahead, stay informed, and above all, I guess, is staying secure. And so let's all continue to learn and adapt, because in such a fast evolving digital landscape, being prepared is our strongest asset. Now, based on everything that we've discussed today, is there any last words that you have to share with us today, Dr. David?
No, not really. That's I think we've had quite a long stint. Thanks very much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and as always, stay curious.